But I'm very delighted, first and foremost, to be here at the Rubin. It's one of my favorite places in all of New York City, and the programming here is so exceptional. So to me, it's an utter privilege to be here with you and to lead you through 2 nights of an introduction to Buddhism. And I have to say, it had been a dream of mine to go through the material that we're going to go through both tonight and next week. Tonight we'll lay the framework together with some of the basic psychology of Buddhism, and that will serve as a jumping off point for next Wednesday, when we'll go more into what's called a sort of tantric development. So you can really, it would behoove you to do both, so that way we can get the sort of foundational material, and then you'll see how developments actually make sense. Tonight's material, it's very interesting. The PowerPoint presentation is actually one image cut up into an entire teaching. And it's a symbolic representation called the Wheel of Life, the Bhavana Chakra, which is said to be one of the Buddha's, a teaching that he gave, one of the only ones that he gave using symbolic means. And I think what we'll find is that you can pack the entire Buddhist philosophy into one image. And that's what I hope to really help you appreciate, that this one image is, it contains within it, oops, I just turned this off. Forgive me, maybe if I just do that. This image here, the Wheel of Life, contains the entire Buddhist science. Which is powerful, because when it looks at, if you're not familiar to Buddhism, what you're looking at maybe is like your mother-in-law on a bad day. or it also shows the emptiness of things, because if you come from a Judeo-Christian background, you might think that this is like a demon or a hell being. But if you are familiar with this, you know exactly what it is, because someone's imparted a teaching in which the images have been chronicled and all the symbols have been distilled and explained, which is what I hope to do. But I do have one caveat, because I know there are people here that are more familiar with the traditional Buddhist descriptions of this, particularly the staff and faculty of the Rubin. If you were to take a guided tour and see this image, you might get a different explanation than the one that I'm going to give you. So I want to prep you by giving you a little caveat on the perspective that I take when I discuss this topic with you. My colleagues and I at the Nalanda Institute really are trying to make Buddhist principles accessible, but without watering them down. And the way that we do that is we spend a ton of time dedicating our lives to the tradition, but then use current neuroscience and psychotherapeutic or health psychology as a lens in which to approach the material. And in that way, we hope to give diligence and preserve the integrity of the tradition, but make it accessible without compromising on the depth and sophistication that we believe is inherent to this tradition. So I will be approaching this very traditional image from the lens of psychotherapy and trying to explain each of the elements using language that hopefully is more accessible to you if you're a newcomer, and if you are a more established practitioner of Buddhism, maybe it will be a nice contrast for you. So this depiction of the Wheel of Life is also a representation of what is called Samsara. Everybody say Samsara. You may be familiar with a film that was recently on offer. It might have been even shown here, of a similar name. Samsara is wrongly called or defined or translated as a life of suffering, the place of suffering. It is more appropriately described as a lived experience of compulsive suffering. Rather than a place, it is an experience. And that is actually a very important distinction. So to give an example of what samsara looks like, I'd like to just briefly begin, if I might, with a client that I'm working with currently, who's in her mid-30s, wonderful woman, but suffers from a lot of what we would call low self-esteem and self-doubt and self-criticism and alienation. And if you look into her history, what you find there is significant trauma in her early childhood in which she had a father who was incredibly distant and neglectful and unavailable emotionally for her, and a very, very passive mother. And one of the glimpses I get of her as a child is having a huge row amongst the family, a blowout you would call, and lots of flagrant accusations and harsh speech, and then she would retreat to her bedroom and lock herself away and begin to kind of dissociate. Really, the body is so overwhelmed at that point that it manually overrides and takes over and disconnects from its immediate environment, which is a classic symptom of trauma. And so she, as soon as she's able, gets her way to college to extricate herself from a dysfunctional family system, and you have to admire that kind of resilience. But what we learn from trauma, and what Buddhists also are proclaiming, is that you can't get over things, you have to go through them. So whatever latent tendencies and imprinting from childhood that she sustained, she could hobble her way through life, but without actually addressing them or taking them seriously, they would just continue to impact her, and they do. And in what way? So there's a very common repetition compulsion that she has in which she will find herself finally into a new romance and get to know a man, a prospective partner, and they'll go on a date, or they'll set up a date, for example, and maybe they're supposed to meet at 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock at a designated time, and he doesn't show up. And what happens inside of her as a result of that moment is a window into the psyche of self-development or self-construction, which is samsara. Because in that moment of the prospective boyfriend not being there, there is an instantaneous reaction that involves her collapsing into an utter sense of abandonment. And before there's even time, she's texting him and emailing him, "Where are you?" And if you looked at your watch, it's only 9:05, and he's on his way. It's New York City after all. But to her, she's teleported back in time in what I call the time machine, back into a time where she is utterly terrified. What she's learned to adapt to that situation, how she learns to respond to those signals and that inner experience, is to elicit a response. She's grabbing and yearning and pulling and texting and calling. Now, what kind of message do you think that sends to someone whom you have just met and are getting to know? So right there and then, she's actually repelling this prospective partner. And in so doing, she is confirming her worst case fear. Do you follow? So in that moment, she is actually enacting childhood unconsciously and creating a situation in which her parental abandonment is recapitulated. Of course, none of this is obvious to her. It's happening unconsciously as a program. I call it the program, the unconscious program. So in a way, if she doesn't take care of her trauma, it is likely, by way of programming, conditioning, habit, she will leave herself forever rendered in a position of eternal abandonment. This is called samsara. Samsara is not a place like hell. Samsara is not a tumultuous environment. Samsara is our own compulsive reactions and instincts that create a world for ourselves in which we are prey or prone to re-experiencing all the dreadful, terrible, traumatic experiences of our life. And I'd like to take that as a jump-off point to now go through this image. So I've actually taken the time. This is a beautiful image that comes from the gallery and was generously offered by the Rubin. And so I took the time to dissect it for us so that we could actually go through it piece by piece and get some clarity about this process of samsara. And of course, the talk of tonight is liberation. How do we become free? How do we use consciousness to intervene in the unconscious process of self-development, that it will assure us a repetition of all the horrors of our past? So this isn't your mother-in-law, and this isn't a demon. What this is from the traditional text. This is the Lord Yama, who is really a representation of impermanence. And so what this image is basically indicating is that the entire psychodynamic experience of recapitulation and all the various ways in which we create both favorable experience and unfavorable experience of our lives is actually held within one principle of impermanence, which means even if we were able to have a gratifying moment, none of us we all know that gratifying moment is bound to what? It's bound to change. And same with the difficult, challenging moments. And this is actually, if you don't take a bird's eye perspective and you're not critical, you could just live a very mundane life thinking that it's all happening to you. Good things happen to you, bad things happen to you. And this is completely contrary to the contemplative traditions across the board of all major traditions, all ascribe to the principle that you are a conscious agent of your situation. Actually, by harnessing consciousness and developing new ways of dealing with internal experience, you could radically alter your condition, your environment. You'll also notice in the top right here that there's also the Buddha and a little monk there these are also, and in the other corner there you see a little wheel of life, or a wheel of liberation, or what's called the Dharma chakra, the teaching of freedom. So right there, and then outside the realms of impermanence, or the principle of impermanence, you have this counter force, which is the Buddha Dharma Sangha. Some of you have heard of the Buddha Dharma Sangha. The Buddha is the mentor, the realized one, the one who saw through the delusions of self-compulsion and self-creation and mastered himself. The Dharma is the teaching. What we're doing here tonight is the teaching of empowerment. How do we empower living beings and students and proponents of consciousness to intervene in their life so that they can actually galvanize their innate potentials, reduce their destructive tendencies, and recreate life for themselves, become free and conscious. And of course, the little monk there is a symbol or stand-in of a community, because how nice it is when we try to work on new habits, how nice is it to do it with other people who are, counterculture, because our culture out there, believe me, its agenda is to keep us asleep. And its agenda is to keep us so asleep that we keep buying so that a few people fill their pockets and enjoy a very comfortable life while the rest of us struggle. And so even market strategy is about appealing to our conscious tendencies, preying on our fears and our insecurities so that we keep the rat wheel going, okay? And so, I don't mind if you want to have an argument about that. That's my take on it. And I think I'm very radical as a human being, but I think rather than having a malicious revolt, I think the most important thing that we can do is empower ourselves with wisdom and really educate ourselves and stop being a slave to the marketing and really take care, because the products that are being sold to us never really make good on their promise, do they? What they do is they last a very short time, whether it be a Mercedes-Benz or the next Palmolive shampoo or the trip to Greece. It never works. It never makes good on its promise. But there is a suggestion in these contemplative traditions that it is possible to have a sustainable internal well-being that doesn't disenfranchise you or disconnect you from the world of impermanence. What the transcendence is isn't the transcendence from a world, but it's a transcendence from an unconscious world. And so when we're truly conscious beings and we're masters of our own inner environment, we could still live in the matrix of reality with highs and lows, but we would be experiencing those highs and lows differently. Do you follow? So let's look at the main one again. What I'd like to just point out is that as we dissect this image, I've got tools here I've never used. How's that? Can everybody see that? Marketing, good marketing. this inner circle here, oh look, that's beautiful. Impermanence is showing itself. Here it goes. I wonder if this battery will run out and just slap me in the face. So you have the wheel of the hub of the wheel is one set of teachings. This second concentric circle is another set of teachings. This third concentric circle, subdivided into sections, sometimes depicted as 5 and sometimes as 6, is another set of teachings. And this last concentric circle is a set of teachings. This compulsive, unconscious wheel of self-development, unconscious self-development, at its hub has 3 driving principles. You could say that this is the propulsion system. Then this is the activity. So you could say that the 3 ingredients here, which we'll go through slide by side, are afflictive reactions or afflictions, what are called the afflictions, the kleshas. This second concentric circle is about karma, a very common term in our culture, but one that's often very misleading. I hope to try to offer a counter proposal about what that word actually means. So we'd say these are the kleshas, the afflictions. This is the karma, the activities based on those afflictions. These are the results. This is called the 6 realms of existence. Again, I'm not suggesting one way of interpreting this model is in a traditional way. These would be considered realms, places you would be reborn in. If you went to Tibet or India, and a geshe would give this teaching, a scholar of the tradition, you might hear, and even the staff who've been trained here might give, and it's completely accurate and corresponds with tradition, might say that based on your afflictions and on your compulsive actions, you would get a set of possible results, which actually would be realms in which you were born in. What I'm going to try to assert is that the afflictions and the actions result in psychological states or conditions. And the last outer realm here is actually a very sophisticated microanalysis of karma, which I think if you were to dissect karma on a light table, like frame by frame, you would get 12 links. This is a very, very central teaching in Buddhism called Pratityat Samuppada, which is the dependent origination. It is the idea that things are being created causally. Now that is an incredibly radical proposition. It is diametrically opposed to the fact that experiences happen because an external being or God or agent is in control of your life and creating your reality. It is also diametrically opposed to the fact that things are completely random, nobody is in control, and things are just happening spontaneously. This assertion straddles the two and suggests that things are happening because of a causally conditioned process. Every given moment, if you could look at it into micro moments, could clearly show it's arising and it's passing in one moment, but also across lifestyle or across a lifespan. Now, if you don't like so much the rendering of karma theory as a continuity of consciousness across lifestyle, what I would propose to you and Western-minded people is an equivalent that has the same import. We don't have a problem with genetics. We don't have a problem that we are the recipient of past information that's been handed down to us biologically. We have no problem with that. We also don't have a problem with narrative, transgenerational narrative. If you come from a culture or a society or particularly family group that carries a narrative with them about what may have or not happened to them in a previous experience of their ancestry, you become the recipient or inherent of that information. And like being a recipient of what's happened in the past, you are also a giver to what happens after you. Your genetics are passed to your children, and your narrative is also passed to your community. And so the main import, whether you like transgenerational narrative or you like epigenetic phenomenon, for example, or the transmigration of consciousness, the main thing, I'm not interested in the debate of which one is true. What I'm interested in is what's the heart or the principle being discussed there, which is it's about responsibility. It's about taking responsibility that you have inherited something. And if you don't take responsibility, it will push you. And it will push you to the point where you then become a proponent of something and you will pass it on, whether it be to one offspring, a larger community, a society, culture, or a species. So this is, we'll get into this topic last. And I'm sure many of you might have questions along the way, and I'll take some of them at the end. So please try to hold on to your questions. This is the propulsion system at the center of the hub. You have a bird, a pig, a little piggy, and a snake, okay? And these two are considered the auxiliary driving forces or root instincts, okay? Deep down in the wells of your unconscious, there are forces that propel you into activity, okay? And Freud did a good job. He identified the main two. But what he missed out on was this more primary one. He got the secondary ones right. Freud was talking about, these are the id instincts, by the way. He was talking about the death instinct or the thanatos instinct or the destructive instinct and the sexual or gratification, pleasure principle, yearning instinct. So, for example, the reason that it's a bird is because in Indian mythology or in Indian anthropology, a bird finds a mate and sticks with it forever. So that they call this one attachment or clinging or obsession or preoccupation, that kind of propulsion that seeks to acquire. I sometimes use the analogy of a car, like this is the accelerator, that what pushes us. And when you even remotely come into contact with a snake, it will defend itself with instantaneous hostility. And so this represents our self-protective, aggressive instinct, the one that wants to distance, cut people off, or destroy them. These two are secondary. The real fundamental root cause of every human experience of self-created, not talking about physical body, talking about psychology, the psychology of the mind, the principle that drives someone to be in a repetition compulsion, unconsciously manufacturing a life of discontent. From the contemplative science point of view is this one, which is the pig. And what a pig does is basically eats and shits where it is, not knowing, doesn't really know or understand what it's doing or where it is. Okay? And that is a symbol for our unconsciousness, and deeper than our sensibility of being unconscious. More specifically, it is a primal tendency in the mind to what's called reify or calcify subject and object. So right now, your minds are perceiving me up here as a separate individual where you subjectively feel yourself to be also inherently separate over there. And that's just de facto how we relate to each other. You don't need meditative analysis. You can just go quantum and you can analyze that sensibility and you can see that the thing that you think is out there, whether it be the person up here or the table or the bottle of water or the mala beads or the carpet, just look at it now. Right now, your mind is reading it as separate things. That carpet there, that table there, that person there, that set of rosary there. But then you can use this incredible ability of our inference to begin to deconstruct what intuitively feels like a separate thing, a tangible thing there. The carpet is maintained and consists of threads. If I took one thread out of this carpet, it would still appear to your mind as a thing in itself. There's a carpet there, and there's one little thread. But if I started pulling out thread by thread by thread and putting the single threads over there, what would I come up with? Eventually, I'd come up with one thread here, and I'd ask you, where the hell did the carpet go? The thing that you thought was really there as a substantial thing in itself has been completely deconstructed. And then finally, you get it, that the entire world that we're navigating is but an appearance that we have misperceived and taken, experientially taken, to be separate. Whereas meditative analysis, this is what this upcoming talk on wisdom will hopefully include, is from the contemplative science. Wisdom is about training your critical reason and your meditative intuition to actually directly perceive phenomenon and their real nature and not fall prey to the deception of your sense faculty. Right now, our sense faculty, our sound, our eyes, nose, mouth, taste, we're taking in data, and this little instinct here, this little piggy here from evolution is going, that's a real separate thing. That's a real separate thing. And meditative analysis and critical reflection and critical reasoning will help you deconstruct it. Quantum is coming up with this, because at one time in science history we had Newtonian physics that was asserting that at the fundamental level of things you'll have these indivisible objects called atoms. And then, of course, what's the logical next question? Is, can you deconstruct the atom? Is the atom the real subatomic level of reality? And of course, quantum comes in and suggests, well, even the atoms can be subdivided, and those subatomic particles can be subatomically divided until we get what? Until we get more like a kind of quantum soup or space or resonance circuitry or wave pattern in which there's more, fluidity than there is solidity. And that everything here, you hear this a lot now, kind of cliche, everything is connected. But in a way, this is what they're saying. That I'm actually not as distinct from the table or from you as my senses are reading. And if I could align my intuition, re-educate my intuition to be more in accord with the reality that's actually there, I might not relate to you in the same afflictive way if I was really aligned to what's really there. I might not use aggression and desire and clinging and holding if I was really intuitively aligned with the nature of reality. I'll get my act together with these gadgets. I will move on then to the second hub. So right in there, oops, see, look at this, learning on the spot. This is where the instincts would be. Here you'll see a descendance of consciousness and an ascendance of consciousness. Based on the propulsions firmly rooted in the ignorance, misperception of reality, the piggy that wants to concretize, calcify, and separate things into discrete objects, and then yearns to control and obtain or push and resist away. Based on those afflictions, we create actions. So the first hub is the kleshas, and the second hub is the karmas. So when you're hostile and you lash out, or when you're desirous and you objectify and try to gratify your needs, sometimes a ripple effect of your consequences happening out there. It doesn't feel good to be objectified sexually by somebody else's greed. And it doesn't feel good to be exploited by somebody else's aggression. That's true. There is a resonance factor, a causal implication of our activities socially and externally, which this tradition doesn't deny. But what's more important in this is the psychological ramification of what's happening in the mind as a residual byproduct of the kind of lifestyle and activity, of intentionality and of verbalization or communication and of behavioral action. What is the residue? What is the consequence of the things that we're thinking, saying, and doing? If you are like me and you're raised in a materialistic, reductionistic paradigm, then you pretty much don't think there's much consequence to your actions, because we live in a paradigm that only cares about what the senses can perceive. So if I dump toxic waste into the Hudson and in the immediate moment I don't see a result, I actually don't think it's going to come back to harm me. It's only now, when it's so blatant in our face that we've destroyed the planet, we're still got our heads in the sand. But karmically, I'm not talking about result, cause and effect, as result is what's coming back to us in the environment, or what goes around comes around. If you say something nasty, they're going to say something nasty to you. I don't think that that's a helpful teaching on karma. I think the more helpful teaching, the one that really puts the spin and the emphasis on responsibility, is the one that suggests that there is a consequence to how we think, to what we say, and to what we do. Not as much on other people, but on ourselves in a future moment. We are coloring future perception that will one day read cues in the environment based on what we're doing right now. So if to go back to the original story of my client, in the moment that it's 9:02 and she is having an abandonment reaction, her incessant control mechanism is having a consequence on her potential partner who's getting this text message going, "What's up your butt? What's going on?" And more than that, like eventually feels like you're a bit of a weirdo and I don't really want to go on a third date with you. That's less important and less critical to this human being's mind, because what she's doing and thinking and saying actually colors, conditions, habituates her perception. So that in a future moment at 9:03 on the next date with a new partner, that cue, that external data point is going to be filtered through the doors of her perception and read a certain way. You cannot say that the way that we're reading and interpreting information happens in a vacuum. The way that we read and interpret information is happening based on conditioning. Classic example is a burning building. I see a burning building and I turn the other way and run. A fireman looks at a burning building, runs right in, up the stairs to save a human life. Why is that? That's because the data point, the external environment, is what's called empty. It means there's no actual meaning to that experience or that event. And because there's no absolute meaning to it, to anything, everything can be read. And everything is being read. It's being read subjectively by all of our perceptions. And our perceptions differ greatly according to what's happening, according to what we've said, thought, and done in our past. So if you get a bunch of training to disarm and to work with your fears and to actually feel empowered with the training that you're getting, and you go through systematic rehearsal, suddenly that burning building doesn't access your storage of dramatic, toxic, vulnerable memories. Actually, what you're drawing on is your memories of, I've done that before, and it's really not so bad. I'm protected, and I'm experienced, and somebody needs me, and I feel good to jump into action. So that's activity. Activity at the most subtle level is intentionality. That's why every Buddhist ritual begins with intention setting. Even if you go to pop cultural yoga classes, if they're worth anything, they will begin with an intention. Why is that? Because intention is the root of every action. And if you're not clear about your intention, likely what's happening is little piggy and little snake and little rooster are guiding your activity without you knowing it. So that's why every intention that you cultivate conscience, you should try to replace it with benevolence, with generosity, with respect, with good wishes. That will set the tone for your preceding activity, which will then come right back to you in terms of what you're habituating perceptually, so that one day in a future moment, those perceptions will receive data points from the external environment that you will interpret more harmoniously and more effectively and more optimally. You'll see tormented beings that are afflicted by little piggy, little rooster, and little snake. Their consciousness, this is consciousness descending. Okay, it's a metaphor for the de-evolution of consciousness, which you can see elements of if you watch Fox News and any news station these days. We're doing a pretty good job of devolving as a human species. But don't also be deceived by the news medias that are bought off by corporate types that want to keep you afraid so that they can just about control you and rig your next election. What would be better is that we wake up and start to practice cultivating positive intentions, benevolent intentions, honest intentions or honest speech, and conducting ourselves in manners that would be appropriate to the reality of interconnectivity. And this is why there's no distinction between Buddhism, Judaism, moderate Islam, etc., where everybody's saying the same thing. Just treat each other the way that you want to be treated. And if you do that, then in a way you have understood the nature of reality. The interconnection of reality means that whatever you would experience and however you would like, you're almost no different than me in a way. You have hopes and fears, you want to be respected, so do I, and we want to treat each other in that kind of field of resonance. So that's the karmic teaching. I want to put that out there, that a very traditional approach to this is to basically say that your mind, your intentionality, creates the environment. So when you get hit by somebody in the shoulder on the subway, a very traditional teaching of karma will suggest that you got hit because what? You hit someone in the past. It's like this kind of, I find it a little juvenile a little bit. It's not that sophisticated. I'm sorry to say that, but I'm just going to own it. Like I don't find that to be that sophisticated. Okay, what's more sophisticated is that person that hit you is coming from their own disenfranchisement or sense of stress or whatever. But the way that you interpret, you didn't create them hitting you, but you have to be responsible for the way that you interpret how they hit you. And isn't it true that we could interpret that very moment on the subway of somebody hitting us in multiplicity of ways, as I've already suggested? You could say, oh, this guy's having a really hard day. What's up his butt? You could say, how dare you? This is a gross injustice, and we're all trying to, how uncivilized. You could hit them back in a moment of reactivity. There's a multiplicity of range of reactions that I think that is really the residual impact of karma. That how we interpret and how we respond in any given moment is really our responsibility. And this, I think, does a good, I think I'm very proud to say, a lot of times when there's karma teaching, there's somebody who suggests that, well, what about innocent babies? How can you say that when they get tortured or when they die, it was their fault? Or what do you think about the Holocaust? And I think, yeah, if you're a traditional Buddhist teacher saying what goes around comes around, you get cornered by that. But if you start to say terrible things happen that shouldn't happen because people are misled by their instincts, and they hurt people, and they abuse people, and they neglect people, and that's not anyone's fault, and you didn't create that. However, you do create how you're responding to them, and you are responsible for finding a more optimal way of relating to your inner experience. And isn't it true that some of the most exceptional heroes that we admire are people that have encountered enormously challenging circumstances but have risen to a really powerful way of understanding it so that it empowers them, it makes them feel more compassion, it lets them forgive or whatever. Like there are ways to respond that actually elevate our game. And that's what this is. Now, I would have to say one really important caveat with this whole thing is, as you remember, it's being held in the jaws of my mother-in-law, which means even if you get better and better at your cultivating a positive intentionality and harmonizing your activity and your emotions, even if you begin to evolve, you are still bound to impermanence. Which means even if you're evolving, you could devolve at any moment. And that is because if you don't take care of Piggy, if Piggy remains, you remain in the jaws of my mother-in-law. Do you follow? As long as there's subject-object dualism, as long as there's the reification habit, as long as there's misperception, ignorance, or delusion, whatever word that works for you, as long as that remains intact as the mulla klesha, the root affliction, then you're bound, even if you adjust your attitude. For example, it's a better thing to be generous than to be stingy. But if you're generous and you still think I'm over here and you're over there, you will evolve up the scale of evolution of consciousness, but you won't be free. And the name of the game, I don't care how rampant the mindfulness movement of our culture is, what they fail to tell you is this whole psychological teaching that suggests even your mindfulness, even your compassion, even your gratitude and your forgiveness, it should be practiced by all means. But if you're not practicing wisdom and you're not dissecting, deconstructing, analyzing, and eventually intuitively reharmonizing yourself to the fundamental matrix of interconnectivity, then you are still in the jaws of the mother-in-law. And that means you can have pleasurable experiences, but you could also devolve. True freedom, this is the radical assertion of Buddhism, is that it is possible for a human being to completely eliminate piggy so that one is completely intuitively aligned with the nature of reality and no longer bound by a compulsive life. That would never mean that somehow you're outside of this realm of the world. You're still in the world. You ever been down to the yoga center called Jiva Mukti? Jiva Mukti means living liberated. It means you're free of being misguided by your propulsions based on misperception and afflictions. But you're not free of the world, you're still here. And that's what the Dalai Lama is, an epitome of. The Dalai Lama still lives in the world, has to get on at 75 or 80, he might be 80 now, he has to get on his treadmill, eat his porridge and do his meditation, and then see a long line of delegates and get on a plane and go give a teaching. He's in the world. But he's not experiencing that rigorous schedule the way that you and I might experience it, as a burden and how I'm just getting my free time. He doesn't feel it that way. Like, well, what about me? There's so many people out there. Another plane that I gotta get on. When are they gonna give me a break around here? No, that doesn't happen, I don't think. So let's get back. We have our propulsion system of little piggy, which is ignorance, snake, which is aggression, and the rooster, which is the lust or desire or clinging. It's more psychologically sophisticated to see it as obsession. And we have as a result of the propulsions of the instincts, we have our descent of karma, their de-evolution and evolution. And based on our karmic activity, then we get the next layer, which is the result. So let's see. Based on your different kinds of propensities and different kinds of activities, you could have different kinds of consequences or results. The traditional approach is to say that these are different worlds you're born into. What I'm going to suggest is, and as I do my colleague and one of my mentors, Mark Epstein, who's a frequent talker here, and his first book, Thoughts Without a Thinker, actually does this presentation in a very systematic way. When I was 20 years old, that was a very influential book, and it is the reason that I call myself a Buddhist psychotherapist. So if you're interested in Buddhist psychotherapy, and you're interested in this psychological rendering or interpretation of the Buddhist wheel of life, you can find that in Mark Epstein's first book, Thoughts Without a Thinker. So here we are. There are, by the way, as a result of our positive evolution based on positive emotions and positive actions, you'll get 3 different results. These are called the God realm, the demigod realm, and the human realm. And as a result of your de-evolution and your negative tendencies and negative actions, you'll get what's called the hungry ghost realm, the hell realm, and the animal realm. Now I'd like to just show what they are psychologically. So here we are in the animal realm, and if you can see down here, you have various creatures that come down to the water to drink. And what happens when creatures go down to the water to drink? They are terrified, actually, of being eaten, right? So this is a representation of the sheer anxiety and paranoia state of being so consumed with our basic needs, food, sex, hunger, and yet being terrified that there's not enough and that someone's going to get what we need, and that sort of tumultuous psychological state, which I am very familiar with, after years of panic disorder, of what it's like to live in a chronic state of looking over your shoulder and wondering when the shoe is going to drop. You'll also notice in each of the 6 realms there is a little Buddha here trying to communicate to the animals. One thing about Buddhism is that it's not a missionary-style religion. It does no good to create converts and to ram down dogmas into their brain about how salvation is possible. Buddhism is an educational tradition. You'll notice why the Dalai Lama doesn't go around doing rituals and healing the masses with water or baptism. What does he do? He flies around the planet giving public talks, like this one, which educate people about their condition and provide hope and optimism and a field guide for them to evolve in a more harmonious, effective, optimal way. So here you'll see in each of the 6 realms there'll be a representation of Buddha, but you'll notice that the Buddha is either carrying something different or he has a different kind of gesture, which is indicative of something in Sanskrit called upaya, which is translated as skillful means. So there is a tactic of an enlightened person, depending, just like a psychiatrist, depending on your illness, will give you a different kind of medication. The Buddha, depending on your illness and your affliction, will give you a different kind of teaching. So just keep that in mind. Here we get into the second of the negative states. The first being the animal realm, and here this is what's called the hungry ghost realm. Aren't these lovely little guys? So we are in the hungry ghost realm. Again, the traditional representation is that these are spirits, like spirits, disembodied spirits. And if you go to China or you go to Tibet, they'll often make a little plate of food, and while you're eating, they offer this plate of food outside of the door where they believe spirits are coming, and you're feeding them. And that is an act of gratitude because there's an understanding that the spirits have enormous appetites and yet very, very skinny throats, which is symbolism for addiction, the inability to satiate. So hungry ghosts, you feed the hungry ghosts out of compassion. Rather than just gobbling down your ramen, you take a little bit out as a gesture of goodwill, as a gesture of recognition that there are millions of beings out there who don't feel like they have enough and are constantly yearning for more, and their acquisition actually ends up destroying themselves and their relationships. So this is the world of addiction. And here you'll notice there's the Buddha there teaching the addicts, but he'll have a different gesture. Sometimes it's a different instrument, sometimes it's a different gesture. Don't worry about it. Just understand that for whatever afflictive state you might find yourself, there is a different kind of teaching that's appropriate for you, which shows the diversity, sophistication of the teachings. Final of the third is the hell realm. I mean, this is probably not so unfamiliar to our Catholic Dante's Inferno type imagery. I think our representations of hell across the board as human species can be very similar. Seething cauldrons where people are bathing and boiling, disembodiment, etc. This is, psychologically speaking, this is trauma. This is what it's like to experience the world as a victim of trauma. Severe trauma, you would say, if you want to use classic diagnostic, psychological diagnosis. What else would fit in here would be the personality disorders like borderline personality, where you're completely unable to sustain a relationship. You feel utterly tormented by life. You can't sustain yourself or your relationships, and it feels like you're constantly being victimized and effed over by reality. And so there you'll see the Buddha there teaching these people to wake up. Basically, that's the whole message. Wherever you are and whatever you're struggling with, there is a path, because the affliction isn't happening to you, the affliction is happening from within you as a generator of your experience. And I think, modern psychotherapy would contend and is very synchronistic with this idea that when people come in, we cannot do much about the traumas of the impacts of the events that have happened to them, but we can empower them with ways of learning how to relate to their inner environment, creating new narratives, accessing resilience, so that they can feel more free to navigate reality without always superimposing that the worst case scenarios from their past are anticipated as a de facto reality of their next moment. And that's what trauma does. It suggests to the mind that whatever has happened to me is going to happen again. And so that's why trauma victims are completely hypervigilant, their nervous systems tank, they're always worried and concerned about whatever, and they're reading the environment and the cues. You could be sitting right next to them and think that someone's, just being kind of a little annoying, and they feel aggressed upon. That's trauma, and that's the hell realm. Then you get the three realms that have to do with the evolution of consciousness. This is where we are, folks. Most of us don't fall in the category. We may have moments or pangs of yearning. We might not be full-blown addicts. We might have moments, pangs of anxiety, but we might not be living in a sustained way in the animal realm. We may have micro-traumas, but we're not necessarily living in a real sustained way in that hell realm. Most of us are living in a fluctuating environment in which, like for these little micro scenes here, you can see like someone's dying, somebody's elderly man, here like they're, I don't know, looks like they're making, they're cutting up food. These are like the mundane activities. You're going through your everyday life, the life cycle. You have a wedding here where people are well dressed and they're like attentive, and here you have people who have like maybe they're practicing some sort of religion. The monks are there congregating, so they're parts of our community or members of our community have the inclination to seek spirituality. There are people in our community that have the inclination to just seek pleasure. There's a whole multiplicity and a whole variety. The hallmark, however, of all of this for the human realm, as the hell realm was torment, the animal realm was paranoia and anxiety, and the ghostly realm was addiction, the hallmark of the human realm, and every one of you has it, is dissatisfaction. The sense that whatever you try to do, however ahead of the game that you get, whatever white picket fence dream you've established, something still doesn't feel like it's filling. It's not an addictive thing, it's just a kind of existential meaninglessness or sort of basic dissatisfaction that the Buddha talked about right in the outset of his Four Noble Truths, dukkha, the experience of like things just don't work out, things aren't working out. And I think that is, so why would you say that that's a hallmark of evolution? Well, they say that this is the most optimal place for a real breakthrough to be possible. Okay, why is that? Unlike the three lower realms where you are completely preoccupied with your circumstance, you're barely, keeping your head above water. Here, don't we have free time? Don't we have the luxury of enough sleep? Don't we have the luxury that our inner monologue isn't so tormenting that we have time to reflect? So on the one hand, we are experiencing dissatisfaction, but on the other hand, we have enough resources, internal and external, to begin to examine existential questions like, why do I exist? And why is this happening to me? And what are the alternatives? When you're in those three lower states, you don't have that luxury. When you're in the highest states of this evolutionary process, you're like a fancy producer in Beverly Hills. You've got it all, and you're not asking the right questions. Here, so we should be thankful, in other words, in this epistemology, in this rendering, we should be thankful that we have enough dissatisfaction to motivate us to inquire into our deeper unconscious way of being. But we have enough sanity and enough resource to actually stay afloat to really see through that inquiry. So as I mentioned, sometimes this last realm is divided into two. Again, this is the last two of the what are called the upper realms, human, then you have what are called the titans, or the demigods, and the gods. Okay? The gods are beings in conditions and circumstances in which every desire has been met. They have it all. They're living the American dream up there, yo. They have it all. And when you have it all from a Buddhist point of view, you forget that the mother-in-law owns you. Which is to say, you can have it all, but you can also lose it instantly. And so while you're enamored and inured in your, luxury palatial palace with maidens spoon-feeding you, grapes, the next day you can have cancer. The next day your partner can die. The next day every cent in your bank account can be wiped out. And the mythology, the very interesting mythology about the gods is that on the last day of their stay in Beverly Hills, it becomes clear to them, they finally realize that life is impermanent and they're going to lose everything, and they are so regretful that they have spent their entire life indulging and pleasing their senses and they have forgot the purpose of life. So let's not do that. Meanwhile, there are people on the corporate ladder just above below the executives who don't get the golden handcuffs or the golden parachutes. And they don't get the perks, and they're a little pissed off about it. They don't recognize that they've actually got a really great setup, but they're looking up at the gods going, you have it a little better and I want it. And so these guys are consumed, this is the psychological state, the psychological state of pride and narcissism, self-involvement. Like it's all about me. Everything's about me. The world doesn't exist, it's just about me. My pleasure, what I've done, my accomplishment, what I need today. Then you have this contingent who are consumed with envy. They forget they have a good rap, and they are preoccupied and obsessed with what others have that they don't have. And there again, you'll see there's a Buddha here. He's got a little guitar, which is, again, as a therapist, I've got to really admire this. Like, you do not treat a trauma patient the same way you deal with a narcissistic business executive. You just cannot. You cannot. It's not a one-size-fits-all treatment. You have to have a different game plan and a different means to intervene and to assist somebody into their process of waking up. So that's why you have Buddha looking different and acting different wherever he is. Okay, so we're getting close to now dissecting on the light board the sophistication of the karma theory, the micro moments. How are we doing, everybody? Is this okay? Do you want to continue? Because I'm supposed to stop soon and ask questions, but I actually do want to finish it. And I was supposed to do some meditation. How, you want to finish it, right? You don't want to be short chat. I want my money back. Oh, you didn't finish. I didn't get with the program. Can't tell you how many times I've not been asked to come back because somebody is very disgruntled with the way I teach. I don't mind. I'm not trying to build a following. Okay. So there are 12 links. If you were going to take a continuum of causation or causality, like a bicycle chain, one link or one bead impacts the next. It doesn't create the next. It conditions the next. Is that clear? Like one link doesn't create the next. It influences the next. It conditions the next. And of course, in a chain, do you really find the beginning? In a circle, is there a beginning? No. So that's very clear in Buddhism because they actually say in beginningless time, which I love. We're sitting here scratching our heads saying Big Bang. It's the fucking ridiculous. Because what's the question with Big Bang? Huh? What happened before Big Bang? So it's an arbitrary deconstruction. It's not that point one started it all. It's that if you just lay it out in a linear format, this is a way to understand it. Number one is piggy. From the root affliction of ignorance or misperception or calcification or reification or objectification, separation, that conditions the next link in the link of karmic or psychological causation. The second link is traumatic imprints. Why don't I go through this way? Unconscious reification, traumatic imprints, distorted consciousness, primitive self-construct, distorted sense perception, sensory contact, hedonic sensation, afflictive reaction, compulsive action, traumatic self-identification, repetition, compulsion, tragic aging, illness, and death. Now, I've taken enormous liberties in the translation, and I will say that, but just for this presentation, I find that this is closer to something that most people can understand. Here we have the first chain. This is a blind woman. This is the blindness of living in a world deluded, unawake, thinking that we're separate. That starts the whole process. This is the second link. Traumatic imprints, samskaras. So just think about it this way. Evolution has created imprinting or encoding on our psyche. Ancestry has created its own or delivered its own imprinting. A baby in the womb, depending on the mother's predisposition and experience, also is creating its own imprinting. This is very recent psychology. Actually, we knew this in the 60s. Women that were pregnant during what was called the Dutch hunger, when there was a mass starvation and a mass, what's it called when there's no food? A famine, excuse me. When there was a mass famine, women that were pregnant during the famine, their babies, to a huge degree, became addicted. Why is that? Because the experience of not having enough that the mother was undergoing elicited biofeedbacks, narrative, emotional tone while that infant was developing, and may have triggered epigenetically or turned on or switched on addictive tendencies, so that when that child came of age, they were more predisposed to become addicted. So we have a whole backlog from evolution, we have a whole backlog from ancestry, we have a whole backlog of bio and genetics from the womb, for example. We have our childhood traumas and issues, not only what we experienced, but the way it was framed in a narrative by the stories that our parents and family system told us. All of this is information that's stored in our bodies and minds. So not only do we have the root affliction of separation, but then we have this whole conditioning that is information latent in our being, that when data points in real time come through the doors of perception, what's there to greet it? But information, association, predetermined, pre-sculpted concepts. Here we have the monkey, which is consciousness. So you have piggy, then you have the potter, which is the imprinting, then you have consciousness. In our culture, reductionistic scientific paradigm, there is really still a debate whether consciousness exists, where the far right are suggesting that it's an epiphenomenon of the brain. From a Buddhist contemplative science, mind and body are different. Body is driven by its own biological causation. Mind is a completely distinct phenomenon. Though it relates to the body, it is defined as that which is clear and knowing. What does that mean? It's clear. Think mirror. If I stand in front of the mirror, what does it do? It reflects me. If you stand in front of the mirror, what does it do? It reflects you. So one of the innate qualities of consciousness is it's a reflective capacity. But what is the difference between a mirror and me? The difference is that a mirror only reflects, whereas I know. So if something comes before me, not only does my mind register it, but it knows it. That awareness, that knowledge, is a quality of consciousness. When we're in low frequency consciousness, the imprints get to determine what it is that consciousness is reflecting. When we're more conscious, when we're in the higher range of consciousness, we're free to really see reality free from past associations. We can really see things as they are. Is that Huxley? I can't remember. When the doors of perception are cleansed, we will see reality as it is. Namarupa, I think. Let me see. Namarupa. Mind and body. So you have Piggy, you have the potter wheel, you have consciousness. Then consciousness becomes more of an organism. It's not just consciousness, it's mind and body. You have your physical apparatus, you have sensations, you have a recognition, you have or perception, you have instincts, and you have consciousness. So this is what we call a person, a human being. A human being in Buddhist psychology is divided into these 5 subsystems. Here it's divided just into two, mind and body, the man and the boat. Okay, but you should know that you can further, one thing about Indian philosophy is you can subdivide everything into infinite parts. Okay, this is just one way of dividing it. But you're not just your consciousness, you are a set of formal factors or physical factors or material factors. You have sensations, you have perceptions, you have intentions or emotions, and you have consciousness. That gets conditioned. Remember, because this causal cycle is going to be conditioning itself all the way around. Here we have the 6 sense bases. So here represented by multiple windows. What are the 6 sense bases? This is window number 1, this is window number 2, this is window number 3, number 4, the body is number 5. What's the 6th? Mind. In Buddhist psychology, it's more than just the 5 sense doors that's receiving external data. There's also what's coming up in the mind is also an input. We just take that input to be reality, but in fact, it's just it's concepts, it's constructs that we superimpose and reify and calcify. When I say to myself, I'm a loser, everybody hates me, I respond to that input as I do the same thing as this. It's like a tangible thing that I need to contend with. When you start meditating, one of the basic instructions they give you is just let that stuff come up and watch it, which is a process of de-reacting to the set agenda that everything that's happening is real. In other words, you relax and allow things, and you relate to objects as if they're much more fluid and ephemeral, and then you can discern, do I want to believe in that? Do I want to follow that? Instead of all of us, whatever pops up, it's like gobble this up and look at that and let me have 6 windows going on my computer, and it's like if it's in there saying it, you have to respond to it. It's like my mind says jump, what do? I gotta jump. You start meditating and you're just chill. No, you're not just chill. So you have your distorted sense perceptions. Ooh, a little X-rated. Quick. Your sense apparatus, behind it, the mind and body, behind it, the consciousness, behind it, the imprinting and encoding, and behind it, the root affliction, Piggy. When data comes into the doors of perception, whatever way it comes up, you have a moment that's called contact. That is the moment when a sense base and a sense input meet. Ouch. This one's called sensation or hedonic sensation. When you have that moment of contact, on the cusp of that contact, there is a sensory experience. That sensory experience is usually divided into three. Nice, pleasant experience, unpleasant experience, and neither pleasant nor unpleasant experience. Afflictive reaction. How do we instantaneously react to pleasant experience? And how do we instantaneously, unconsciously react to unpleasant experience? And how do we instantaneously react to times when we're bored, there's not much happening? It's not really indifference. You start, if you're a sensate creature like me, you start craving and looking for the next pleasant experience. So you're having an experience, and your impulse is to chase and secure the experiences that are pleasant, to avoid and numb and distance yourself from the experiences that are unpleasant. And when there's neither something pronounced in either direction, you're instantaneously and without volition, without consciousness, looking for the next good ride. After that, you have compulsive action. So this is where karma kicks in. Very interestingly, once there's contact and there's that moment from a Buddhist psychological karmic perspective is what's called a ripening effect. That moment when the guy nudges you on the subway and you feel it inside, if you feel hurt by it, if you feel victimized by it, if you feel disenfranchised by it, that relationship to that event is the ripening of things that you have said, thought, and done in your past. Believe it or not, this is just the presentation. In a way, there's nothing you can do about it because it's a seed that's already been planted. And when a sprout comes out of the soil, you can't say, no, it's not time for you yet. What are you doing here? It has already been planted and it has its own activation. So this guy that's hitting you is not your karma. This guy that's hitting you is just a delivery mechanism that is activating a storehouse of some resonance that you have already enacted. Nothing you can do about it. However, this guy is your action to that thing which has happened or been activated. So you could feel a moment of abandonment, which there's nothing you can do about, because for the last 20 or 30 years you have been acculturating yourself to that abandonment. And then you have a choice. You can do what you always do, thereby setting in motion and predetermining a future moment for the exact same thing to happen again. Or you can use consciousness to relate to that internal ripening and manage it or relate to it in a new way. Do you follow? That moment is called the gap, because there's a microsecond on the light table between sequence frames where the ripening happens and the reactivity then is then enacted. Micro moment. And if you don't intervene, what happens is the whole thing comes a-coming round and determines that the same thing will happen tomorrow. So what we're saying is you have this series of conditionalities that lead to this one moment, one specific moment in time. There's contact, there's an event, there is a release of a stored data bank of some residual trauma or affect from a previous time. In the case of the vignette I gave you at the beginning, it was this woman's sense of abandonment, which has been self-perpetuated her entire life. There it is again. 9:02, bam! She reads that cue through the filters of her perception. The emotional reaction happens. The abandonment is felt strongly. And it's pulling her. She's got the phone out. She stops it. If she stops it, she actually can prevent a whole cycle of happening. Now, let's not go Oprah on me. If you stop it once, does it really make a big deal? Like, I hate these lists, 10 ways to be free, and just start juicing and you'll be happy. Like, it's all bullshit. It's all mass marketing, all of it. Like, if you're not a mature adult and you don't recognize that change is hard, it's going to be a long road. it's going to be a long road. The shift of having to micro-intervene, and not just once, not just twice, not just 3 times, but decondition and recondition yourself is a lifelong process. Karma is not instant. You're basically using one moment to reconstruct yourself anew. This is my new book. It's called Life Architect. It's about intervening at these micro moments with wisdom and compassion and self-discipline in order to, with the understanding of karma, that what you do in any given moment will predict who you will be and how you'll respond to the environment in a future moment. So right now, today, we are constructing ourselves tomorrow, which is why I hate this BS in our culture about spirituality, that be here now. Be here now is half the story. Be here now with your trauma is a hard sell. Be here now with your trauma and intervene with compassion, because tomorrow you'll evolve. That's the real story. Half of it is be here now. The other half is intervene more constructively. Does that change your experience in the moment? If you're having a moment of abandonment and you decide somehow miraculously to intervene with consciousness and just use your breath rather than plug away at the text message, does it alter your abandonment in the moment? Probably not. That's a hard sell for Oprah. She doesn't get a lot of people that way. It's much easier to tell people, you're going to feel great. You're going to do this and you're going to feel great. It'll all go away. It's a long process. So that's where we are right now, and I'm running out of time. I usually teach 2 hours long, but I'm going to respect the time and just move forward quickly. I've basically given you a sense of the real principle of the karmic teaching, of the whole proposition of liberation is in that micro moment right there at that link. This is supposed to be a pregnant woman. What she represents is your self-construct. On the heels of that abandonment, what is my patient telling herself about who she is? Based on all her years of her father neglecting her, and based on the reason that every date 3 minutes past the hour doesn't happen, and she has this massive abandonment experience, what is she telling herself about who she is? Thank you very much. That is called a traumatic self-perception, or a traumatic self-identification. That's what this is. Thus concludes 10 links. Everything from here is about the future moment. If you end on the link of a traumatic abandonment, I'm unworthy, I'm unlovable, the world is unsafe, in a future moment you have birth. And after you have birth, you have death. These aren't physical birth and death because we're using a psychological model. What they are is you having the same experience in another moment. She's out there with her 15th date and he doesn't show up, and there, bang again, is a birth, isn't it? It's like another birth of my abandonment. And another collapse into the demise of my relationships is the death. Over and over and over and over again. Thus, you have the 12 links. This is a model that's going in the book. It basically shows you all 12 links on the perimeter. At the center, you'll have your latent tendencies from the past. Then you have the whole swath of what's happening in the moment. And then you have a small little portion of the pie about what the consequences are in the future. And that's a very important teaching, whether you look at it epigenetically and evolutionarily, whether you look at it via narrative, whether you look at it as transmigration of your soul or consciousness. You must understand that you are coming in not as a blank screen. You are coming in imprinted. You are having experiences in the moment. You have a micro moment to intervene more skillfully. If you do, you can alter the future. If you do not, you will perpetuate the future. That's the teaching on samsara and the teaching on nirvana. Okay? Satisfactory? This is if you want to distill it into a subset or a smaller teaching where the 12 are distilled to 4. You have your misperception, which is piggy. You have your afflictive emotions, which is the abandonment. You have your reactive action, which is texting frenetically about where the hell are you? And you have your compulsive life when she ditches him, when he ditches her. And around they go. Here we have it in reverse, liberation. If you could cleanse the doors of perception to read environment accurately, how do you do that? You train your mind in what's called wisdom, meditative analysis, but also rigorous quantum analysis, okay? Really rigorously deconstructing what you think your senses are perceiving and deconstruct it. Meditation, the whole mindfulness movement, it's focused on this part of the equation to the exclusion of the other two, which is a disservice to our community. The full package, what I call the full Monty, is what is required for liberation. What meditation does is when you have that moment of abandonment, you learn how to regulate yourself in a more optimal way so that you don't get dragged into compulsive reaction. But you still need to act in the world. So the last little bit there is, what are all the recommendations across the board from every tradition and culture that have asked us about how we should live and how we should treat ourselves and others? Those are the new ways of the ways that we should intervene if we are able to cultivate that micro gap. How should we respond? With self-kindness, with self-validation. I mean, that's what this patient needs, right? She's lived her whole life not feeling validated, and she's constantly looking for another person to see her. And she needs to see herself. And not only see herself, she needs to see herself clearly as the amazing person that she is. The person that I see is an amazing person. But she's got such a distorted self-image based on neglect. And she'll never get enough from somebody else. She needs to see herself and relate to herself with compassion and care. Then you'll get the beginnings of a new kind of life, which is called the life of freedom. Nirvana actually means the cessation of the compulsive life. So one way of understanding nirvana is liberation, freedom. Freedom not to another place or another land. Freedom from the ways that your mind has been pushing you around like a rubber ducky in the ocean. Okay, don't forget liberation. Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. Thank you so much.